There is a disease that steals your ability to sleep. Not for a night, not for a week, forever. It starts with insomnia that will not break. Then come the hallucinations. Then your body forgets how to regulate its own temperature. Then your heart races for no reason. Then you waste away, fully conscious, unable to close your eyes until there is nothing left. It is called fatal familial insomnia, and it has killed over 30 members of the same Italian family across 200 years. There is no cure. Sleeping pills do not work. Nothing works. The disease is caused by a single misfolded protein that eats the brain's sleep switch from the inside. And here is what makes it worse. There is a sporadic form. No family history, no warning. It can happen to anyone. Tonight, we are going to follow that protein through the brain. We are going to watch what happens to the human body, hour by hour, day by day, when sleep is taken away. And by the end, you will understand why every living creature on this planet, from dolphins to jellyfish to you, must sleep or die. If you enjoy our calm nighttime journeys, remember to like and subscribe. We highly encourage our community to discuss the video topics in the comments and react to other comments. It is the most fun when we share our thoughts. Now, let us begin. Tonight, we are going somewhere unsettling. We are going to follow a single misfolded protein through the brain of a living person and watch it destroy the one thing that keeps them alive. Not their heart, not their lungs, their ability to sleep. There is a real disease that does exactly this. It has no cure, it has no treatment, and it kills everyone who gets it. From there, we will meet a 17-year-old boy who stayed awake for 11 days on a dare and spent the rest of his life paying for it. We will watch the human brain dissolve into hallucinations after just 48 hours without rest. We will learn that your brain has a secret washing machine that only runs while you are unconscious, and that without it, the toxic proteins that cause Alzheimer's disease begin piling up within a single night. We will descend into the darkest corners of history, where governments turned sleeplessness into a weapon. We will meet the animals that evolved to cheat sleep, the dolphins that never fully lose consciousness, the birds that sleep for seconds while soaring over open ocean. And we will end with the deepest unsolved mystery in all of biology. Every living creature on this planet sleeps. Every single one, even jellyfish, even organisms without brains. And after more than a century of research, science still cannot fully explain why. But we begin tonight with a family, an Italian family, a family that has carried a secret in their blood for over 200 years. A secret that has killed more than 30 of them in exactly the same way. Chapter 1. The family that stopped sleeping. Sometime in the late 1700s, in the northeast of Italy, a man began to lose his sleep. Not in the way you or I might lose sleep. Lying awake, worrying about tomorrow, tossing and turning through a restless night. This was different. This was something inside his brain switching off permanently. It started with insomnia that would not break. Night after night, week after week, his body begged for rest, but his brain refused to grant it. Then came the sweating. His heart raced for no reason. His pupils shrank to pinpoints. His body temperature swung wildly, as though the thermostat inside him had been smashed. Then came the hallucinations. Waking dreams that bled into his conscious hours until he could no longer tell what was real. His family watched him deteriorate. They watched him become someone else entirely. And then, after months of this, fully conscious and unable to close his eyes, he died. His children carried the same fate in their genes. Some of them would discover this decades later when the same symptoms appeared in their own bodies. The same insomnia, the same autonomic collapse, the same hallucinations, the same death. Generation after generation, the pattern repeated. The family kept it quiet. For over 2 centuries, this was a private horror. a curse whispered about behind closed doors in the villages of northern Italy. Then, in the early 1980s, an Italian physician named Ignazio Reuter began investigating the mysterious illness that had plagued his own family by marriage. He traced the cases. He gathered medical records. He connected the deaths across generations, and he brought the evidence to Elio Lugaresi, one of Italy's leading sleep researchers at the University of Bologna. In 1986, Lugaresi and his colleagues formally described the disease for the first time in medical literature. They watched a 53-year-old man from the family deteriorate through every stage. They documented everything: the progressive insomnia, the panic attacks, the autonomic dysfunction, the hallucinations, the wasting, the silence at the end. After 9 months, he was dead. When they examined his brain, they found something chilling. The thalamus, a small structure buried deep in the center of the brain that acts as the master switch for sleep, had been destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. The neurons in the anterior ventral and mediodorsal thalamic nuclei were almost entirely gone, eaten away, and every other region of the brain appeared relatively normal. Whatever had killed this man had targeted the sleep switch with terrifying precision. They named the disease fatal familial insomnia, and over the following years, they discovered what caused it: a prion, a single misfolded protein. Prions are among the strangest and most frightening things in biology. They are not viruses. They are not bacteria. They carry no DNA. They are simply proteins that have folded into the wrong shape. And that wrong shape is contagious. When a misfolded prion comes into contact with a normally folded protein of the same type, it forces the normal protein to refold into the same wrong configuration. The process cascades. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become thousands. The misfolded proteins accumulate in brain tissue, forming clumps that destroy neurons from the inside. There is no immune response that can stop them. There is no drug that can reach them. There is no surgery that can remove them. They are, for now, untouchable. In fatal familial insomnia, the mutation sits at codon 178 of the PRNP gene on chromosome 20. A single-point mutation, one wrong letter in the genetic code. That is all it takes. And because the inheritance is autosomal dominant, if one of your parents carries the mutation, you have a 50% chance of inheriting it. You can carry it your entire adult life without knowing. The average age of onset is around 50. Some people develop symptoms as young as 13. Others make it to their 60s before the switch begins to fail. The disease unfolds in 4 clinical stages, and each one is worse than the last. Stage 1 lasts roughly 4 months. Progressive insomnia sets in. Panic attacks begin. Paranoia creeps into the edges of thought. The person knows something is wrong but cannot articulate what. Sleep becomes shorter, thinner, less restorative, and then it begins to vanish entirely. Stage 2 spans roughly 4 more months. Hallucinations become persistent. The autonomic nervous system, the system that controls heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, and sweating, begins to malfunction. The body loses its ability to regulate itself. The person sweats profusely, their heart races, their blood pressure swings. They are trapped in a body that no longer obeys its own commands. Stage 3 brings complete insomnia, total, unbroken wakefulness. The person stops sleeping entirely. Rapid weight loss begins. Cognitive decline accelerates into dementia. Speech deteriorates. Movement becomes erratic. The world becomes a blur of waking nightmare. Stage 4 is the end. The person becomes unresponsive, mute. Their eyes may remain open, but there is no one behind them. Then death. Average survival from the onset of symptoms is 18 months. Some last longer, some do not make it to a year. There is no treatment. Sleeping pills do not work. Barbiturates have no effect on the brainwaves of fatal familial insomnia patients. Benzodiazepines do nothing. The brain has lost the hardware for sleep. No chemical can restore what has been physically destroyed. The disease has been identified in more than 50 families worldwide. The original Italian kindred included 288 documented members across 6 generations. At least 29 of them were affected. The earliest records of symptoms in that family reach back to 1765. For over 2 centuries, this one mutation has been silently executing members of the same bloodline. And here is the detail that makes it even more disturbing. There is a sporadic form. Sporadic fatal insomnia occurs without the genetic mutation. No family history, no warning. The prion misfolds spontaneously for reasons no one fully understands. As of recent reviews, only about 30 to 40 cases have ever been documented worldwide. But the disease is so rare and so poorly understood that misdiagnosis is almost certainly common. One case report from 2024 described a patient who was initially diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease before the true diagnosis of fatal familial insomnia was confirmed. How many others have been missed? How many have died of this disease without anyone knowing what it was? Right now, in Italy, a clinical trial is underway. It is the only prevention trial in the world for this disease. Researchers are giving the antibiotic doxycycline 100 milligrams daily for 10 years to carriers of the mutation. 10 carriers, compared against 15 non-carriers from the same family. The hope is that the antibiotic might delay or prevent the prion from misfolding. It is a decade-long gamble on a single drug for a disease that has never been stopped. The people in that trial go to sleep every night knowing that inside their cells, a genetic timer may be counting down. They close their eyes and they fall asleep, and they wake up in the morning and they are grateful, because they know what it means to lose that. They have watched their parents lose it, their aunts, their uncles, their cousins. They have watched the people they love lie awake night after night, month after month, until there was nothing left. Fatal familial insomnia proves something that science took a very long time to accept. Losing sleep can kill you. Not metaphorically, not in the vague sense that chronic sleep deprivation is bad for your health. Literally, if you remove the ability to sleep, the body collapses. The systems fail one by one, and you die, fully conscious, unable to escape into the darkness that the rest of us take for granted every single night. But it took decades for the scientific world to fully grasp this. In fact, the longest anyone ever deliberately stayed awake was a 17-year-old kid in San Diego, and when he was done, the scientist who watched him told the world he was fine. He was not fine. And what happened to him decades later suggests that the price of sleeplessness is not always collected immediately. Sometimes it waits. That boy and the 11 days that changed sleep science forever are where we go next. Chapter 2: 11 Days Without Sleep. December 1963, San Diego, California. A military family named the Gardners had just moved to town, and their oldest son, 17-year-old Randy Gardner, was a self-proclaimed science nerd. He had entered the science fair in every town his family had lived in. Now he was in a big city, and he wanted to make a splash at the 10th annual Greater San Diego Science Fair. The idea came from a radio DJ named Tom Rounds, who had recently stayed awake for 260 hours. Randy and 2 of his high school classmates, Bruce McAllister and Joe Marciano, decided they would break that record. They flipped a coin to decide who would be the one to go without sleep. Randy lost the toss. He would be the subject. His friends would take turns staying awake on rotations around the clock to monitor him and keep him from drifting off. What started as a teenage science project became the most famous sleep deprivation experiment in history. The experiment began during winter break on December 28, 1963. Randy woke up at 6 in the morning, alert and energized. His friends began logging every change in his behavior, his mood, his physical reactions. The plan was simple. Stay awake for 11 days. Do not sleep. see what happens. Word got out. A Stanford University sleep researcher named William Dement heard about the experiment and drove down to San Diego to observe. A Navy medic named Lieutenant Commander John Ross was brought in to monitor Randy's health. What had been a high school stunt now had professional eyes on it. And what those eyes witnessed over the next 11 days would become one of the most detailed records of human sleep deprivation ever produced. The first 2 days were manageable. Randy felt tired but functional. He stayed on his feet as much as possible. He avoided beds and sofas. He played basketball. He went for drives. The tiredness was there, but it was bearable, like pulling an all-nighter that just kept going. Day 3 was when things started to change. Randy became nauseous, a deep, persistent nausea that he described as going on for almost the entire rest of the experiment. His memory began to slip. He would start a thought and lose it midway through. Simple recall tasks became difficult. He said it was almost like an early Alzheimer-type experience brought on by the lack of sleep. Day 4 brought the first hallucination. Randy looked at a street sign and believed it was a person. Then, something stranger happened. He became convinced that he was Paul Lowe, a famous black running back for the San Diego Chargers. Randy was a white teenager who weighed barely 120 pounds. His brain was beginning to construct realities that had no connection to who he actually was. Around this time, William Dement arrived from Stanford. He brought energy and distraction. He rented a convertible and drove Randy around the city. He took him to amusement arcades. He played games with him. Dement's presence helped keep Randy stimulated during what was becoming an increasingly difficult stretch. But even with the distraction, the cracks were widening. Days 5 through 7 saw a steep decline. Randy's speech became slurred. He struggled to name common objects. Words that should have come automatically required enormous effort. His hallucinations intensified. He saw things that were not there, patterns in the air, shapes forming in empty rooms. His cognitive abilities, the higher-order functions that define human thought, were disintegrating. Day 9 brought fragmented thinking. Randy would begin sentences and trail off, unable to remember where they were going. His thoughts broke apart, like ice cracking on a warming lake. He could not hold a line of reasoning for more than a few seconds before it dissolved. Day 10 brought paranoia. A radio host was scheduled to interview Randy, and Randy became convinced the man was trying to humiliate him. Suspicion crept into his interactions. He snapped at the people around him. The determined, curious teenager who had started this experiment was barely recognizable. And then, on January 8, 1964, at 2 in the morning, Randy Gardner broke the world record. He had been awake for 264 hours, 11 days, and 24 minutes. He held a press conference. Remarkably, he appeared coherent. He answered questions. He stood upright. He spoke in complete sentences. The reporters were impressed. William Dement was impressed. The narrative that went out to the world was that Randy Gardner had stayed awake for 11 days and was essentially fine. A remarkable demonstration of human endurance. No lasting harm done. But that was not the whole story. Lieutenant Commander John Ross, the Navy medic who had been monitoring Randy throughout the experiment, filed a clinical report that told a very different tale. Ross documented serious cognitive and behavioral changes throughout the 11 days: moodiness, problems with concentration and short-term memory, paranoia, hallucinations. On the final day, when Randy was asked to subtract 7 repeatedly starting from 100, he stopped at 65. When asked why, he said he had forgotten what he was doing. The gap between what the public heard and what the medical records showed would define this experiment for decades. Dement told the world Randy was fine. Ross documented that he was anything but. And the myth that sleep deprivation is unpleasant but essentially harmless took root in the popular imagination, a myth that would take years to correct. After the press conference, Randy was taken to a naval hospital. Researchers attached electrodes to his head to monitor his brain waves. And then, finally, he slept. For 14 hours and 46 minutes, he woke up groggy but functional. He said he felt no groggier than a normal person. Within a few days, he seemed to have recovered completely. He and his friends won first place at the science fair. The experiment became one of the most cited cases in sleep research. And for decades, the story ended there. But the story did not end there. Decades later, in his 60s, Randy Gardner developed severe insomnia. Not the occasional sleepless night that most people experience. Crippling, relentless insomnia that lasted for years. He described it in a 2017 interview. About 10 years ago, he said, "I stopped sleeping. I could not sleep. I would lay in bed 5-6 hours. Sleep maybe 15 minutes. Then wake up again. I was a basket case." It is unclear what triggered his condition. Insomnia has many causes, and drawing a direct line from an experiment conducted 50 years earlier to a condition developed in old age is scientifically difficult. But Randy himself had no doubts. He called it karmic payback for what he had done to his body as a teenager. The scientific community never had a chance to study another case like his under controlled conditions. In 1997, Guinness World Records stopped tracking the category of longest time without sleep. They cited the health dangers as too severe. The editor-in-chief of Guinness wrote that sleep is one of those key, absolute, fundamental parts of human nature. Challenging the extremes of something so essential was too dangerous to encourage. At the time Guinness discontinued the category, the record was held by Robert MacDonald, who had gone 18 days and 21 hours without sleep, 453 hours and 40 minutes. We do not know what happened to him afterward. There was one more reason Guinness gave for stopping. They acknowledged that the unwitting holder of the true record for sleeplessness might not be someone who chose to stay awake. It might be someone dying of fatal familial insomnia, the disease from our first chapter, a person trapped in wakefulness, not by choice, but by a prion eating through their thalamus. That realization that the record for human sleeplessness might belong to someone in the final stages of an incurable brain disease was enough to close the category permanently. Randy Gardner's experiment revealed something important, but it also obscured something equally important. It showed that a healthy teenager could endure 11 days without sleep and appear to recover, but it hid the deeper truth. The hallucinations that began on day 4, the paranoia on day 10, the cognitive collapse documented by John Ross but overshadowed by Dement's optimistic narrative, and the insomnia that arrived decades later like a debt finally being collected. The experiment also raised a question that would haunt sleep research for the next 60 years. If Randy Gardner hallucinated on day 4, if he became paranoid by day 10, if his brain began fabricating entire identities by the end of the first week, what happens to someone who is kept awake not for 11 days, but for weeks? Not voluntarily, but against their will. Not in a San Diego bedroom with friends playing basketball to keep them stimulated, but in a dark room, shackled, with music blasting and lights blazing, and no one coming to help is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Randy Gardner held a press conference when his experiment ended. He smiled for the cameras. He went home and slept in his own bed. Others who were kept awake against their will did not hold press conferences. They did not go home. Some of them did not survive. But before we go to those dark rooms, we need to understand what happens inside the human brain during the first 72 hours without sleep. Not in the extreme case of 11 days. Not in the terminal case of fatal familial insomnia. In the ordinary everyday case, the case that applies to you. Because the truth is, you do not need 11 days for the damage to begin. You need one night, just one. And the effects are worse than almost anyone realizes. That is where we go next. Chapter 3. Your brain on no sleep. The first 72 hours. You have probably done this to yourself, maybe not for 11 days, maybe not even for 2, but chances are, at some point in your life, you have gone a full 24 hours without sleep. A late flight, a deadline, a night shift, a newborn child who would not stop crying, and you told yourself it was fine. You were tired, sure, but you could handle it. You drove to work. You made decisions. You spoke to people. You functioned. But you were not functioning. Not the way you thought you were. Because after just one night without sleep, your brain is operating at the cognitive equivalent of being legally intoxicated. Research has consistently shown that 24 hours of continuous wakefulness produces impairment comparable to a blood alcohol concentration of 0.10%. That is above the legal limit for driving in every country on Earth. Your reaction time slows, your judgment degrades, your ability to process new information drops sharply. A 2025 study confirmed that a single day without sleep causes significant decreases in attentional processing, increases reaction times, and disrupts cognitive flexibility. You are slower, dumber, and more dangerous than you realize, and you cannot feel it happening. That is the cruelest part. Sleep deprivation impairs the very faculties you would need to recognize that you are impaired. But the most dangerous thing that happens after 24 hours is not the cognitive fog, it is the microsleeps. Microsleeps are involuntary episodes of unconsciousness lasting anywhere from 1 to 30 seconds. They happen without warning. Your eyes may remain open. You may appear awake to anyone watching, but your brain has briefly checked out. During a microsleep, you are functionally blind. You cannot process visual information. You cannot react to stimuli. If you are driving a car at highway speed, a 3-second microsleep means you have traveled the length of a football field completely unconscious. The Exxon Valdez oil spill, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the Challenger space shuttle explosion. The investigation into each of these catastrophes identified sleep-deprived workers making critical errors during the hours when the human circadian rhythm is at its lowest point. Microsleeps and the impaired judgment that accompanies them have been linked to some of the most devastating accidents in modern history, and they begin after just one night without rest. Now, stretch the clock to 48 hours, 2 days without sleep, and the brain enters territory that most people have never experienced and would not want to. At the 48-hour mark, the brain begins to distort perception. Peripheral vision flickers, shadows move when they should not. Shapes appear at the edges of sight that dissolve when you turn to look at them. Sounds that do not exist begin to register. A whisper in an empty room, a knock on a door that no one is behind. The world starts to feel wrong in ways that are difficult to articulate, like reality has developed a hairline crack. What is happening inside the brain at this point is a tug-of-war between two systems that are losing coordination. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes hyperactive. It begins registering danger everywhere. Neutral faces look hostile. Ambiguous sounds seem threatening. The emotional volume gets turned up to maximum. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational judgment, impulse control, and decision-making, begins to go offline. The part of the brain that would normally evaluate those false alarms and dismiss them is losing power. You are left with a hair-trigger alarm system and no one manning the control room. And then something even stranger begins. Parts of the brain start falling asleep while the person remains outwardly awake. This is called local sleep. Individual brain regions enter brief states that resemble non-rapid eye movement sleep, flickering in and out of consciousness, dozens of times per minute. The person does not know it is happening. They appear awake. They may be talking, walking, even working, but regions of their brain are intermittently going dark, like lights flickering in a building with a failing electrical grid. The implications of local sleep are disturbing. It means that a sleep-deprived person can be partially unconscious without realizing it. Their brain is not fully online, but they have no way of knowing which parts are offline at any given moment. They may be processing visual information, but not emotional context. They may hear words, but not understand their meaning. They may be looking directly at something and not seeing it. Now push to 72 hours, 3 full days without sleep, and the brain crosses a threshold that researchers have described as the edge of psychosis. After 3 days, full hallucinations are common, not the flickering shadows of 48 hours, vivid, complex, immersive hallucinations. People see things that are not there. They hear voices. They develop delusions. Paranoia becomes intense and persistent. Disordered thinking makes coherent conversation nearly impossible. The person may not know where they are, what day it is, or who is speaking to them. A 2024 clinical case review examined the neurochemical basis for this collapse and found something striking. Sleep deprivation drives the brain into what researchers called a maladaptive hyperdopaminergic state. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward, motivation, and alertness, floods the system in an attempt to keep the brain awake. But this dopamine surge produces a neurochemical signature that is remarkably similar to what is seen in the brains of people with schizophrenia. The paranoia, the hallucinations, the disordered thinking, these are not just symptoms of tiredness. They are symptoms of a brain that has chemically reconfigured itself into a state that mimics psychotic illness. A 2018 meta-analysis published in Frontiers in Psychiatry confirmed this pattern. The researchers documented what they called a gradual progression towards psychosis with increasing time awake. The longer a person goes without sleep, the more closely their brain resembles the brain of someone experiencing a psychotic episode. This is not metaphorical. It is measurable. It is neurochemical. The sleep-deprived brain is, in a quantifiable clinical sense, losing its grip on reality. And here is what makes this relevant to you. You do not need to stay awake for 3 days to enter this territory. Chronic partial sleep deprivation, the kind experienced by millions of people every night, sleeping 5 or 6 hours instead of 7 or 8, produces a slower version of the same cascade. The cognitive impairment accumulates. The emotional dysregulation builds. The microsleeps become more frequent. The prefrontal cortex grows quieter, while the amygdala grows louder. It happens gradually, night after night, and because it happens gradually, most people never notice. They adapt to a diminished baseline. They assume this is just how life feels. They do not realize they are walking around in a brain that is operating on emergency reserves. The comparison between acute sleep deprivation and chronic partial sleep deprivation is one of the most important findings in modern sleep science. A landmark study showed that people who slept 6 hours a night for 14 consecutive nights showed cognitive impairment equivalent to someone who had been awake for 48 hours straight. They performed as poorly on attention and reaction time tests as someone who had not slept in 2 full days. But here is the critical difference. The people who had been awake for 48 hours knew they were impaired. They felt terrible. The people who had been sleeping 6 hours a night for 2 weeks had no idea. They rated their own alertness and performance as normal. They believed they had adapted. They had not. Their brains had simply stopped telling them how badly they were failing. This is what makes chronic sleep deprivation so dangerous. It is invisible to the person experiencing it. The brain recalibrates its sense of normal downward, and the person loses the ability to perceive their own decline. They feel fine. They are not fine. They are driving impaired, making decisions impaired, processing emotions impaired, and they do not know it. The first 72 hours without sleep take you from legally drunk to hallucinating to the doorstep of clinical psychosis. But psychosis is only what happens to the mind. While your conscious experience is dissolving, something far more sinister is happening deeper inside your body, in your blood, in your immune system, in the very DNA that holds your cells together. Sleep deprivation does not just break your brain. It is aging you from the inside out. And the damage starts earlier than anyone expected. That is what we turn to now. Chapter 4. The Body Breaks Down. We have been talking about what sleep deprivation does to the mind. The hallucinations, the paranoia, the slow erasure of rational thought. But the mind is only the part you notice. Beneath the surface, in the tissues and organs and bloodstream that you cannot feel failing, the damage is deeper, quieter, and in many ways more dangerous. Let us start with the immune system, because what happens to your body's defenses when you do not sleep is one of the most alarming findings in modern medicine. Your immune system has a frontline force called natural killer cells. These are the cells whose primary job is to identify and destroy cells that have become cancerous or infected by viruses. They patrol the body continuously, scanning for threats, and when they find a cell that has gone wrong, they kill it. They are your first and most important line of defense against cancer. A single night of poor sleep measurably reduces the activity of natural killer cells, not after a week of bad sleep, not after a month, after one night. A 2025 study from Washington State University made this even more concrete. Researchers found that just 72 hours of sleep deprivation reduced the number of cytotoxic immune cells in the tumor microenvironment and decreased the number of antigen-presenting dendritic cells in the lymph nodes. In plain language, sleep deprivation pulled the cancer-killing soldiers off the front line and left the tumors less guarded. The implications ripple outward. The World Health Organization classified night shift work as a probable human carcinogen in 2007. Not a possible carcinogen, a probable one. That is the same category as certain pesticides and UV radiation. The mechanism is straightforward. Sleep deprivation suppresses melatonin, the hormone produced primarily during darkness that regulates circadian rhythm. Melatonin is not just a sleep signal. It has anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant properties. When you do not sleep, melatonin production drops. When melatonin drops, the body's ability to surveil and destroy abnormal cells weakens. Epidemiological studies have linked chronic short sleep with increased risk of breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and prostate cancer. You are not just tired, your body's cancer surveillance system is compromised. Now consider the heart. Sleep deprivation has been associated with a 48% increase in the risk of developing or dying from coronary heart disease and a 15% increase in the risk of stroke. Those numbers come from a major meta-analysis published in the European Heart Journal that examined data from nearly 500,000 participants across multiple studies. 48%. That is not a marginal increase. That is nearly half again as likely to develop heart disease if you consistently do not sleep enough. The mechanism is a cascade. When you do not sleep, the sympathetic nervous system, your body's fight or flight response, stays activated. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, remains elevated. Your heart rate increases. Your blood pressure rises. Your arteries stiffen. Even a single night without sleep can cause measurable tachycardia and increased arterial rigidity in otherwise healthy young adults. Normally, sleep provides a period of cardiovascular downregulation. Your heart rate drops, your blood pressure falls, your blood vessels relax. This nightly maintenance window allows the cardiovascular system to recover from the demands of the day. Without it, the heart is running on emergency mode 24 hours a day. The system never gets its rest period, and over time, the accumulated stress manifests as disease, atherosclerosis, hypertension, heart failure, stroke. Then there is insulin resistance. A 2024 study confirmed that sleeping only 3 to 5 hours per day significantly raises the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And here is the part that should concern anyone who thinks they can compensate with a healthy diet. The study found that healthy eating could not offset the metabolic damage caused by insufficient sleep. You cannot out-eat sleep deprivation. The body's ability to regulate blood sugar depends on adequate rest, and without it, the metabolic machinery breaks down regardless of what you put into it. But the most unsettling finding may be the one that connects sleep deprivation to aging itself. Not the feeling of aging, not the appearance of aging, the biological reality of aging, measured at the level of your chromosomes. Inside every cell in your body, at the tips of your chromosomes, are structures called telomeres. Think of them as the plastic caps on the end of shoelaces. They protect the chromosome from fraying and degrading during cell division. Every time a cell divides, the telomeres get slightly shorter. When they become too short, the cell can no longer divide properly. It becomes senescent, a zombie cell that no longer functions but does not die, releasing inflammatory signals that damage surrounding tissue. Telomere length is one of the most reliable biological markers of aging. Shorter telomeres mean older cells. Older cells mean an older body, regardless of what the calendar says. A 2025 study published in the Journal of Occupational Medicine and Toxicology found that prolonged night shift work, a proxy for chronic sleep disruption, is associated with significant telomere shortening. The people who worked the most night shifts had biologically older cells than their age would predict. A separate 2025 study published in Neuroscience went further. It found that insomnia accelerates epigenetic clocks. Epigenetic clocks are sophisticated measures of biological age based on chemical modifications to DNA, called methylation. The study found that people with insomnia showed acceleration in specific epigenetic age measures called grim age and skin blood clock, and showed reduced estimates of telomere length. Insomnia was not just making people feel older, it was making their DNA older. The molecular machinery of aging was running faster in people who could not sleep. Partial sleep deprivation activates something called the DNA damage response and triggers the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, known by the GRIM acronym SASP. This is the molecular pathway through which damaged cells begin pumping out inflammatory signals that accelerate the aging of surrounding tissue. Sleep deprivation does not just fail to repair the wear and tear of the day, it actively accelerates the processes that break the body down. You are not just tired, you are getting older, faster at the cellular level. Step back and look at the full picture. After just one night without sleep, your natural killer cells are suppressed and your cancer surveillance is weakened. Your heart rate is elevated. Your blood pressure is up. Your blood vessels are stiffer. Your insulin sensitivity is impaired. Your cortisol is elevated. Your inflammatory markers are rising. After chronic, insufficient sleep, measured in weeks and months and years, the cumulative damage manifests as increased rates of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, obesity, depression, and cancer. Your telomeres are shortening. Your epigenetic clocks are accelerating. Your cells are aging faster than they should. And all of this, every single one of these effects, is happening while you feel like you are functioning normally. Because as we discussed, the brain stops telling you how impaired you are. You adjust downward. You assume this is just how life feels. But there is one more effect of sleep deprivation that is arguably the most terrifying of all, and it is happening in the one organ you cannot see and cannot feel, your brain. Not the psychological effects we discussed earlier. Something physical, something structural, something that, until the year 2012, we did not even know existed. In that year, a neuroscientist at the University of Rochester discovered that the brain has its own waste clearance system, a hidden network of channels that flushes out the toxic byproducts of daily neural activity. And this system has a catch. It is almost completely inactive while you are awake. It only turns on when you are asleep. When you do not sleep, this system does not run, and the waste that it is supposed to clear includes the very proteins that cause Alzheimer's disease. That discovery and the revolution it has unleashed in neuroscience is where we go next. Chapter 5: The Brain's Secret Plumbing. For most of the history of neuroscience, there was something about the brain that did not make sense. Every other organ in your body has a lymphatic system, a network of vessels and channels that carries away metabolic waste, the cellular garbage that accumulates as a byproduct of normal activity. Your muscles have it, your liver has it, your skin has it. But the brain, the most metabolically active organ in your body, consuming roughly 20% of your total energy, while representing only 2% of your body weight, appeared to have no lymphatic drainage at all. This was a puzzle. The brain produces enormous amounts of metabolic waste, proteins that have served their purpose, cellular debris, toxic byproducts of neural activity. If these waste products were not being cleared, they would accumulate and poison the very neurons that produced them. Yet for decades, no one could find the plumbing. The brain appeared to be a closed system, generating waste with no apparent means of taking out the trash. Then, in 2012, everything changed. A neuroscientist named Mike Nedergaard, working at the University of Rochester, made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of the brain, of sleep, and of neurodegenerative disease. She and her team identified a previously unrecognized system of fluid channels in the brain that functions as a waste clearance network. They called it the glymphatic system, a name combining glial cells, the support cells of the brain, with lymphatic, because the system functions analogously to the lymphatic system in the rest of the body. The glymphatic system works like this: cerebrospinal fluid, the clear fluid that surrounds and cushions the brain, flows into the brain tissue along channels that run alongside arteries. These channels are formed by the end feet of astrocytes, star-shaped glial cells that wrap around blood vessels. The astrocyte end feet are studded with water channels called aquaporin 4, which allow the cerebrospinal fluid to pass into the brain tissue itself. As this fluid flows through the tissue, it picks up metabolic waste, including amyloid beta and tau, the toxic proteins whose accumulation is the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. The waste-laden fluid then drains out along channels that run alongside veins, eventually reaching the lymphatic vessels in the membranes surrounding the brain, and from there, exiting to the lymph nodes in the neck and the bloodstream. The system is elegant, it is efficient, and it has a critical feature that connects it directly to everything we have been discussing tonight. Glymphatic clearance is dramatically more active during sleep than during wakefulness. In the original mouse studies, Nedergaard's team found that the interstitial space between brain cells expands by up to 60% during sleep. This expansion opens up the channels through which cerebrospinal fluid flows, allowing waste to be flushed out far more efficiently. During wakefulness, the interstitial space contracts, the channels narrow, and waste clearance slows to a trickle. The brain essentially only takes out its trash while you are unconscious. For years, this finding was based primarily on animal studies. The evidence was compelling but indirect. Scientists could not easily observe the glymphatic system working in living human brains. That changed in October of 2024, when researchers at Oregon Health and Science University became the first team to definitively image the glymphatic system operating in living humans. They studied 5 neurosurgery patients and confirmed that perivascular spaces, the channels around blood vessels through which cerebrospinal fluid flows, were actively transporting fluid in the human brain during sleep, just as the mouse models had predicted. As the lead researcher noted, people had long thought these perivascular spaces were important, but it had never been proved in humans. Now it had. Then, in January of 2025, a landmark paper published in the journal Cell identified the mechanism that drives glymphatic clearance during sleep. The answer was norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter that regulates arousal and attention during non-rapid eye movement sleep. Norepinephrine levels oscillate in slow rhythmic waves. These oscillations drive corresponding waves of constriction and dilation in cerebral blood vessels, a process called slow vasomotion. The rhythmic pulsing of the blood vessels acts as a pump, pushing cerebrospinal fluid through the perivascular spaces and through the brain tissue. The slow, steady heartbeat of sleeping arteries is literally flushing your brain clean. That same study revealed a troubling secondary finding. Zolpidem, one of the most commonly prescribed sleep medications in the world, disrupted these norepinephrine oscillations and reduced glymphatic clearance by 30%. The drug that helps you fall asleep may be preventing your brain from cleaning itself while you are asleep. In January of 2026, the evidence became even more direct. A randomized crossover trial published in Nature Communications studied 39 human participants and proved that glymphatic clearance during normal sleep increased morning plasma levels of Alzheimer's disease biomarkers compared to a night of sleep deprivation. In other words, after a normal night of sleep, the Alzheimer-causing proteins that had been flushed from the brain showed up in the bloodstream the next morning, confirming that the glymphatic system had actively cleared them overnight. After a night of sleep deprivation, those proteins stayed in the brain. The cleaning system had not run. The toxic waste remained. Around the same time, researchers at the University of Washington tested a new wearable device, a head cap embedded with electrodes that could track glymphatic function through a single night of sleep. And they discovered something that surprised them. The glymphatic system does not work like an on-off switch, turning on when you fall asleep and off when you wake up. Instead, it accelerates the longer you sleep. The clearance function ramps up gradually over the course of the night and slows down gradually as you approach waking. This means that cutting your sleep short does not just reduce the total time the system runs. It cuts off the period when the system is running at its highest efficiency. The last hours of a full night of sleep may be when the most cleaning gets done. The implications for Alzheimer's disease are staggering. Research has shown that a single night of sleep deprivation significantly increases the deposition of amyloid beta in the hippocampus and thalamus, two brain regions critical for memory and sleep regulation. And chronic poor sleep creates what researchers have described as a vicious feedback loop. Less sleep leads to more amyloid accumulation. More amyloid disrupts sleep quality. Worse sleep leads to even more amyloid. The cycle accelerates, potentially for years or decades before clinical symptoms appear. A bidirectional relationship has been proposed between impaired sleep and neurodegeneration. The damage may begin long before the first memory lapse, long before the first forgotten name, long before the diagnosis. The implication is as direct as it is unsettling. Alzheimer's disease may not just disrupt sleep. Sleep disruption may cause Alzheimer's disease. Think about that for a moment. The disease that more people fear than almost any other, the disease that slowly erases who you are, may be connected at its root to something as simple and as profound as whether you sleep enough. Not whether you take the right supplements, not whether you do the right brain exercises, whether you sleep. The glymphatic system is arguably the most important discovery in sleep science in the last 50 years. It answers one of the deepest questions about sleep. What is the brain doing while we are unconscious? And the answer is breathtaking. It is cleaning itself. It is flushing out the molecular debris of the day. It is protecting itself against the very diseases that destroy it. And it can only do this while you are asleep. This knowledge makes everything we have discussed tonight more urgent. The immune collapse, the cardiovascular damage, the accelerated aging, the cognitive decline. All of it is compounded by the fact that the brain's own maintenance system is being starved of the time it needs to function. Every night of insufficient sleep is a night the toxic waste stays, a night the amyloid builds, a night the machinery of neurodegeneration advances one step further. And this raises a question that shifts our documentary into much darker territory. If sleep is this essential, if your brain literally poisons itself without it, why would anyone deliberately take it away from another human being? Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. The answer involves dark rooms, blinding lights, shackles, and a government program that ran for years. And it raises questions about the limits of human cruelty that have never been fully answered. That is where we go next. Chapter 6: Sleep as a Weapon. Sleep deprivation has been used as a tool of coercion for centuries. Long before anyone understood the neuroscience of sleep, long before the glymphatic system or amyloid beta or microsleeps, people understood instinctively that keeping someone awake long enough would break them. The body would do the work for you. No bruises, no blood, no visible marks. Just the slow, invisible collapse of a mind denied the one thing it needs most. The United States government formally defined sleep deprivation as an illegal form of coercion as early as 1930. The European Court of Human Rights addressed it directly in 1978, in the case of Ireland versus the United Kingdom, ruling on interrogation techniques used by British forces in Northern Ireland that included forcing detainees to stand in stress positions while being deprived of sleep. Soviet interrogators used it systematically during the Cold War. North Korean forces employed it against prisoners of war. It has appeared in virtually every conflict and every regime that has sought to extract information or compliance from captive human beings. The appeal of sleep deprivation as a method of coercion is grimly practical. It leaves no physical evidence. It requires no special equipment. It produces rapid psychological breakdown, far faster than most other methods, and it creates a state of helplessness and confusion in which the person will say or do almost anything to be allowed to rest. The biology that we have spent this documentary exploring, the hallucinations, the paranoia, the cognitive collapse, the dissolution of identity, becomes the instrument. The person's own body is turned against them. Between 2002 and 2007, the Central Intelligence Agency operated a program of what it officially termed enhanced interrogation techniques. The details of this program were made public in a 2014 report by the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sleep deprivation was one of the core methods employed. The report documented that at least 39 individuals were subjected to these techniques. Detainees were kept awake for up to 180 hours at a time, 7.5 days. They were forced into standing positions while shackled, their arms sometimes chained above their heads. They were subjected to constant bright lights and loud music. They were denied any opportunity to sit, lie down, or close their eyes. Some were forced to wear diapers so they would not need to be unchained for basic human functions. The consequences were exactly what the neuroscience would predict. One detainee was described in the report as clearly a broken man and on the verge of a complete breakdown after a month of sleep deprivation combined with other techniques. Another experienced auditory hallucinations, hearing voices that were not there, the same symptom that appears in laboratory settings after 72 hours without sleep. One case stands as a reminder that the line between coercion and something far worse is thinner than any policy memo can contain. A detainee named Gul Rahman was subjected to 48 hours of sleep deprivation in a facility where temperatures dropped to near freezing. He was shackled, partially unclothed, and placed in a position that prevented sleep. He died of hypothermia. The sleep deprivation did not kill him directly, but it was part of a system that removed his ability to protect himself, to regulate his own body, to survive. The internal legal memoranda produced by the program argued that these techniques did not constitute prohibited treatment. The reasoning relied on definitions and distinctions that many legal scholars and human rights organizations have rejected. The program generated intense debate that continues to this day about where the line falls between permissible interrogation and something that no government should do to any human being under any circumstances. But the use of enforced sleeplessness was not confined to detention facilities. It showed up on the battlefield, not as a deliberate tactic, but as an unavoidable consequence of operational demands, and the results were equally devastating. In 2007, a United States Army sergeant named Evan Valer was on a sniper mission in Iraq. During the mission, he shot and killed an unarmed Iraqi civilian. At his trial, medical experts testified about the conditions under which the killing occurred. Valer had been operating on less than 5 hours of sleep over the preceding 72 hours. The defense argued that extreme sleep deprivation had placed him in a state where he could not exercise normal moral judgment, that he was effectively functioning as an automaton, carrying out actions without the cognitive engagement that distinguishes a deliberate decision from an involuntary response. Valer was convicted, but the court considered the sleep deprivation as a mitigating factor and imposed a reduced sentence. The case raised a question that the military has grappled with ever since. If sleep deprivation can impair judgment to the point where a soldier cannot distinguish between a legitimate threat and an unarmed civilian, then every sleep-deprived soldier in a combat zone is a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. And the data suggests this is not an edge case. Surveys of deployed United States Air Force personnel have shown that 40% of airmen have sleep efficiency below clinical thresholds. A 2024 report by the Government Accountability Office found that 93% of United States military service members reported sleeping 7 hours or less per night and feeling sleep-deprived. The report noted that lack of sleep among active duty service members has led to fatal accidents and hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to ships, vehicles, and aircraft. Many service members reported slower reflexes and responses, lower cognitive function, and concerns about near collisions or making a deadly mistake because of fatigue. This is not a footnote in military history. This is an ongoing crisis. The same cognitive impairment that we described in Chapter 3, the equivalent of legal intoxication after 24 hours without sleep, the hallucinations after 48, the psychosis after 72, is being experienced by soldiers who are carrying weapons, making life and death decisions, and operating complex machinery in environments where a single error can kill dozens of people. The history of sleep deprivation as a weapon reveals something uncomfortable about the human relationship with sleep. We have known for almost a century that depriving a person of sleep constitutes a form of severe mistreatment. We have known for decades that the effects include hallucination, paranoia, cognitive collapse, and potentially death. We have documented these effects in clinical settings, in detention facilities, and on battlefields. And yet we continue to build systems, military, industrial, medical, educational, that systematically deprive people of sleep and then express surprise when the consequences arrive. The soldier who cannot distinguish friend from foe after 3 days without rest. The surgeon who makes a critical error after a 36-hour shift. The truck driver who drifts across the center line at 4 in the morning. These are not failures of individual willpower. They are the predictable, documented, scientifically understood consequences of a biological need being denied. The military understands this, at least in principle, and so rather than accepting sleep deprivation as an unavoidable cost of warfare, the Department of Defense has spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars pursuing a different solution. Not more sleep for soldiers. Better wakefulness without sleep. The quest for the sleepless soldier, a way to keep human beings operational for days at a time without the cognitive collapse that normally accompanies extended wakefulness. That quest has already produced one drug that changed everything. A molecule discovered in France in the 1970s that allows a person to stay awake for 40 hours and then sleep normally, without the addiction, the jitters, or the crash of traditional stimulants. That drug is now used by military forces around the world, and 2 new programs launched by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in 2024 and 2025 are pushing the frontier even further, not by keeping soldiers awake, but by compressing sleep itself, trying to squeeze a full night of restoration into just 3 hours. The quest for the sleepless soldier and the drug that launched it is where we go next. Chapter 7. The Quest for the Sleepless Soldier. In the late 1970s, French scientists at Lafon Laboratories discovered a molecule that would change the relationship between the military and sleep forever. The compound was called modafinil. It promoted wakefulness, it sharpened focus, it extended the ability to function without rest. And unlike the amphetamines that militaries had been handing their soldiers since the Second World War, modafinil did not produce the jittery, wired, crash and burn cycle that made stimulants as dangerous as they were effective. Amphetamines had been the military's answer to sleeplessness for decades. American, British, German, and Japanese forces all distributed them during the Second World War. The United States continued supplying soldiers with amphetamines through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and beyond. The drugs kept soldiers awake, but they also produced agitation, impaired judgment, paranoia, and severe rebound crashes when the effects wore off. Recovery sleep after amphetamine use was disrupted, meaning the soldier paid twice, once while the drug was wearing off, and again when they tried to rest. Modafinil was different. In nearly every trial, the drug extended the ability to function without sleep while avoiding the worst side effects of traditional stimulants. Soldiers on modafinil could perform effectively for 40 hours straight and then sleep normally without needing additional medication to come down. It did not suppress appetite the way amphetamines did. It did not produce the euphoria that leads to addiction, and the recovery sleep afterward was natural and restorative. Military adoption was rapid. French Foreign Legion paratroopers received modafinil during the 1991 Gulf War. The United States Air Force approved it for pilots on extended missions in 2003. Britain's Ministry of Defence purchased 24,000 tablets by 2004. The drug has been tested in Black Hawk helicopter pilots, F-117 stealth fighter pilots, United States Navy SEAL trainees, and French Navy long-range patrol crews. By 2025, its off-label use is regulated in the military aviation programs of the United States, India, Singapore, and the Netherlands. Modafinil works by blocking the reuptake of dopamine in the brain, increasing its availability at the synapse. It also affects histamine, norepinephrine, and orexin systems, all of which play roles in promoting wakefulness. The result is a state of sustained alertness that feels less like being artificially stimulated and more like simply not being tired. Pilots report clearer thinking. Soldiers report maintained reaction times. Decision-making remains intact long after it would normally deteriorate. But modafinil does not eliminate the need for sleep. It postpones the consequences. The brain still accumulates metabolic waste. The glymphatic system still needs sleep to run. The immune system still needs its nightly restoration. Modafinil buys time, and that time can save lives on a battlefield. But it is borrowed against a biological debt that must eventually be repaid. For the military, modafinil was a breakthrough but not a solution. The real goal was always more ambitious, not just keeping soldiers awake longer, but finding a way to make sleep itself more efficient. To compress the restoration that normally requires 7 or 8 hours into a fraction of that time. To hack the architecture of sleep so that every minute of rest delivers maximum benefit. In 2024, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, better known as DARPA, launched a program called AWARE. The full name is Alert Warfighter Enablement. The concept is science fiction made real. AWARE is developing a combination of photo-switchable drugs and near-infrared light-emitting devices to target specific brain regions associated with alertness and executive function. The idea works like this. Researchers are developing a modified version of dextroamphetamine, a well-known stimulant that is chemically inert until it is activated by near-infrared light. The drug is taken but remains dormant. Then a wearable device, something like a headband or helmet-mounted emitter, shines near-infrared light through the skull and into the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for working memory, decision-making, and executive function. The light activates the drug precisely where it is needed. The light can be turned off and the drug deactivates. No systemic stimulation. No activation of the amygdala or the striatum, which are the deep brain structures associated with anxiety, mood disruption, and euphoria. Just targeted, reversible, precision alertness. If it works, AWARE would represent a fundamental shift in how sleep deprivation is managed. Instead of flooding the entire brain with a wakefulness-promoting chemical, the system would deliver activation exactly where it is needed and nowhere else. And the temporal control, the ability to turn the drug on and off with light, could dramatically reduce the potential for addiction and side effects. But DARPA did not stop there. In February of 2025, the agency announced a second program called RESTORE. The full name is Re-Engineering Enabling Sleep Transitions in Operationally Restrictive Environments, and RESTORE is pursuing something even more ambitious than AWARE. RESTORE is not trying to keep soldiers awake longer, it is trying to make sleep itself more efficient. The program aims to demonstrate precision control of sleep macro and micro architectures to optimize cognitive performance following a restriction to 3 hours of sleep each day. Not eliminating sleep, compressing it, making every minute of sleep count more. The program is based on emerging research into sleep microarchitectures, the fine-grained patterns of brain activity that occur within sleep stages. Not all sleep is created equal. Within a period of non-rapid eye movement sleep, there are bursts of activity called sleep spindles and slow oscillations that are associated with memory consolidation and neural repair. Within rapid eye movement sleep, there are patterns associated with emotional processing and creative problem-solving. RESTORE's hypothesis is that if you can precisely control these microarchitectures using non-invasive neuromodulation, stimulation applied from outside the skull, you can increase the restorative value of each minute of sleep. 3 hours of optimized sleep might deliver the cognitive benefits that normally require 7 or 8. The program is exploring non-invasive neuromodulation technologies, including transcranial electrical stimulation and acoustic stimulation, to enhance specific sleep patterns while a person is resting. The goal is not to replace sleep, but to intensify it, to make the cleaning cycle run faster, the memory consolidation more efficient, the immune restoration more complete, all within a compressed window. Whether this is achievable remains an open question. Every piece of evidence from the glymphatic system research suggests that clearance accelerates the longer you sleep, which would seem to argue against compression. The immune data suggests that the body needs extended periods of rest for full restoration, not brief compressed bursts. And the telomere and epigenetic clock research implies that the biological price of insufficient sleep operates at a level deeper than neural architecture. You can perhaps optimize brain function on 3 hours of sleep, but can you prevent the cardiovascular damage, the immune suppression, the accelerated cellular aging? The military's stated goal is saving lives, reducing friendly fire incidents caused by impaired judgment, preventing fatal accidents caused by microsleeps, keeping soldiers sharp in environments where full sleep is impossible. These are real problems. Real soldiers die because they cannot sleep in combat. Any technology that reduces those deaths is worth pursuing. But the implications extend far beyond the battlefield. Modafinil is already widely used off-label by students, executives, shift workers, and technology industry employees seeking a competitive edge. If DARPA succeeds in developing technology that allows effective functioning on 3 hours of sleep, The civilian applications will be enormous and immediate, and the long-term consequences are unknown. The deeper question remains, and it is the same question that runs through this entire documentary. Can you engineer around sleep without paying the biological price? Can you compress the cleaning cycle, shorten the restoration window, and still avoid the cascade of damage that sleep deprivation inflicts? Or is sleep, like breathing, like eating, like water, something that simply cannot be shortcutted, no matter how clever the technology? Humans are trying to engineer sleeplessness, but nature got there first. Hundreds of millions of years before DARPA, before modafinil, before the first human ever pulled an all-nighter, evolution was already working on the problem. And some animals found solutions that we can barely comprehend. Dolphins never fully sleep. They have not fully lost consciousness for a single moment in their entire lives. Frigate birds fly for weeks over open ocean on 45 minutes of sleep per day. And jellyfish, organisms without brains, enter states that meet the functional definition of sleep. These animals did not cheat sleep. They evolved something extraordinary. And what they teach us about the nature of sleep is both beautiful and humbling. That is where we go next. Chapter 8: The Animals That Cheat Sleep. After the darkness of the last 2 chapters, let us go somewhere different. Let us go to the ocean. Let us go to the sky. Let us go to the places where evolution solved the problem of sleep in ways that make human engineering look primitive. Consider the bottlenose dolphin. It has never, in its entire life, been fully unconscious, not once. From the moment it is born until the moment it dies, at least half of its brain is awake, always. Dolphins use a form of rest called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. One hemisphere of the brain enters deep sleep, while the other hemisphere remains fully awake. The sleeping side shuts down. The waking side keeps the animal swimming, breathing, navigating, and monitoring for predators. One eye closes, the eye connected to the sleeping hemisphere. The other eye stays open, scanning the water. After a period, the hemispheres switch. The side that was sleeping wakes up. The side that was awake goes to sleep. The dolphin continues swimming without interruption. The total sleep time for a bottlenose dolphin is roughly 8 hours per day, comparable to what humans need, but it is distributed across the 2 hemispheres in alternating shifts. So the animal never experiences what you and I would recognize as sleep. It never lies still. It never becomes unresponsive. It never enters the vulnerable, defenseless state that sleep imposes on virtually every other mammal on Earth. This makes biological sense for an animal that must consciously breathe. Dolphins are voluntary breathers. Unlike humans, who breathe automatically even while unconscious, a dolphin must make a deliberate decision to surface and inhale. If both hemispheres of a dolphin's brain fell asleep simultaneously, the animal would stop breathing and drown. Unihemispheric sleep is not a luxury, it is survival. And the adaptation extends to the most extreme circumstances. Newborn orca calves and their mothers do not sleep at all for approximately the first month of the calf's life. During this critical period, the mother and calf are migrating, and the calf must swim continuously to keep up with the pod. Its body is too small and too lean to float if it stops. So both mother and calf remain in continuous motion, fully active, for weeks on end. How they manage the biological costs of this sustained wakefulness remains one of the great mysteries of marine mammal physiology. Now leave the ocean and look up. The great frigate bird spends weeks soaring over the open Pacific. Its feathers are not waterproof, so landing on the ocean surface is not an option. It must stay airborne. It eats by snatching fish from the surface or stealing from other birds in flight. It drinks almost nothing, and it sleeps, if you can call it that, in bursts of seconds at a time, totaling less than 45 minutes per day. Researchers fitted great frigate birds with miniature electroencephalogram devices to measure their brain activity during these oceanic flights. What they found was extraordinary. The birds entered brief episodes of unihemispheric slow-wave sleep while gliding at high altitudes. One hemisphere slept for a few seconds, while the other maintained flight control. Occasionally, both hemispheres slept simultaneously, but only for seconds at a time. Total sleep during multi-day flights amounted to a fraction of what the birds slept on land, where they averaged 12 hours per day. The frigate bird's sleep in flight is a masterpiece of biological economy. Just enough unconsciousness to perform essential neural maintenance. Just little enough to keep the animal airborne and alive. And when the birds finally return to land after weeks at sea, they pay off their accumulated sleep debt with dramatically increased slow-wave sleep, as though the brain knows exactly how much cleaning it has deferred and rushes to catch up. Alpine swifts take this even further. These birds have been recorded flying continuously for more than 6 months without landing, 200 days in the air. They eat, mate, and sleep on the wing. They enter brief episodes of unihemispheric sleep while soaring at altitude, maintaining enough neural control to avoid obstacles and adjust their flight path. When they finally land to breed, their sleep behavior changes completely, shifting to the consolidated bilateral sleep patterns seen in ground-dwelling birds. The swift's brain, like the dolphin's, has evolved the ability to rest itself in pieces rather than all at once. These adaptations are astonishing, but they share a common thread that is even more astonishing. None of these animals have eliminated sleep. Every single one of them still sleeps. The dolphins still log 8 hours of slow-wave activity per day, just one hemisphere at a time. The frigate birds still enter slow-wave sleep, just in tiny fragments. The swifts still show sleep patterns, just distributed across months of continuous flight. Evolution did not find a way around sleep. It found ways to fit sleep into impossible circumstances. The need itself was non-negotiable. And this leads to a finding that should stop you in your tracks. No animal has ever been conclusively shown to not sleep at all. Not one. In the entire history of zoological research, across every phylum, every class, every order, no creature has been found that completely lacks sleep or a sleep-like state. There was a time when people believed bullfrogs never slept. The claim was based on experiments conducted in the 1960s in which bullfrogs were given electrical shocks and measured for responsiveness. The frogs responded to shocks at a similar rate regardless of time of day, and the researchers concluded that bullfrogs do not sleep. But later work showed that the stimulation used in the original experiments was intense enough to wake a sleeping animal. The bullfrogs were sleeping. The experiment was just too loud to catch them doing it. The most remarkable example may be the most humble. In 2017, researchers studying Cassiopeia, a genus of jellyfish, discovered that these brainless organisms enter a nightly quiet state in which their pulsing slows dramatically. The researchers tested the jellyfish against the functional criteria for sleep. Reduced activity? Yes. Reduced responsiveness to stimuli? Yes. Rapid reversibility, meaning they could be roused back to full activity? Yes. And critically, sleep rebound, meaning that if the jellyfish were deprived of their quiet period by disturbing them throughout the night, they showed increased quiet behavior the following night? Yes. Jellyfish meet the behavioral definition of sleep. They have no central nervous system. They have no brain. They have a diffuse neural net, a loose network of nerve cells spread throughout their body. And yet they sleep. Something about the fundamental operation of a multicellular nervous system, even the most primitive kind, requires periodic states of reduced activity and responsiveness. Sleep may be as ancient as neurons themselves. The lesson from the animal kingdom is profound and humbling. Evolution is the greatest optimizer in the history of life on Earth. Over hundreds of millions of years, it has produced organisms that can survive in boiling acid, in Antarctic ice, in the crushing pressure of the deep ocean floor, in the vacuum of space. Evolution has found ways to solve almost every problem that physics and chemistry throw at living organisms. But evolution could not solve sleep. It tried. Dolphins evolved to sleep one hemisphere at a time. Frigate birds evolved to sleep in seconds-long fragments while flying. Certain species of fish sleep with dramatically reduced brain activity while maintaining swimming behavior. Migrating birds drastically compress their sleep. Fur seals alternate between bilateral sleep on land and unihemispheric sleep in water. Every conceivable modification to sleep has been explored by natural selection over geological timescales. But no lineage, no species, no organism has ever eliminated sleep entirely. Every adaptation is a way of fitting sleep into difficult circumstances, never a way of removing it. The need is absolute. Whatever sleep does, it is more important than eating, more important than mating, more important than avoiding predators. Because animals that are asleep cannot do any of those things, and yet they sleep anyway. Every single one of them. This brings us to the deepest unsolved question in all of biology. A question that has occupied scientists for over a century. A question that, despite enormous advances in neuroscience, genetics, and evolutionary biology, remains without a complete answer. Why does anything sleep at all? What could possibly be so important that every living creature on this planet is willing to become unconscious, vulnerable, and defenseless for hours every day? That question is where we go next. Chapter 9. Why does anything sleep? Sleep is the most counterintuitive behavior in nature. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. A sleeping animal cannot eat. It cannot reproduce. It cannot protect its young. It cannot flee from predators. It cannot forage, explore, or defend its territory. Every hour spent sleeping is an hour that could have been spent surviving. For an animal in the wild, where competition for food is fierce and predators are constant, sleep is an enormous liability. An unconscious animal is easy prey. A sleeping organism is at the mercy of the world. If sleep served no critical function, natural selection would have eliminated it hundreds of millions of years ago. Any mutation that reduced the need for sleep, that allowed an animal to spend more hours eating, mating, and escaping danger, would have been a massive evolutionary advantage. That animal would have outcompeted its sleeping rivals. Its genes would have spread. Over time, sleep would have been selected out of the gene pool entirely. That did not happen. Not once. Not in any species. Every animal on Earth sleeps. Mammals sleep. Birds sleep. Reptiles sleep. Amphibians sleep. Fish sleep. Insects sleep. Worms sleep. Jellyfish enter sleep, like states. Daily sleep duration ranges from as little as 4 hours in elephants and giraffes to as much as 20 hours in certain species of bats and opossums. The architecture varies enormously. Some animals sleep in one long block. Others sleep in dozens of short episodes throughout the day. Some sleep with half their brain at a time. Some sleep while moving, but all of them sleep. As Alan Rechtschaffen, the University of Chicago researcher whose rat experiments we will encounter later in this documentary, once said, "If sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it is the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made." So what is the function? Why does every living thing with a nervous system need to become periodically unconscious? Scientists have been asking this question for over a century, and the honest answer, even in 2026, is that we do not have a complete answer. We have theories, we have evidence, we have pieces of the puzzle, but no single explanation accounts for all the data. The oldest and simplest theory is energy conservation. Sleep reduces metabolic demand. An animal that sleeps during the hours when foraging would be inefficient because it is dark, or because its predators are most active, saves energy by shutting down non-essential processes. In this view, sleep evolved as a way to conserve calories during downtime. The problem with this theory is obvious. Rest without unconsciousness would achieve the same energy savings. An animal could simply lie still, reduce its activity, lower its heart rate, and conserve energy without entering the vulnerable, unresponsive state of sleep. Quiet wakefulness would be far safer than unconsciousness. The fact that animals do not just rest, but actually lose consciousness, suggests that something is happening during sleep that requires the brain to be offline. Energy conservation alone cannot explain why the lights have to go out. The restorative theory proposes that sleep is when the body repairs itself. Growth hormone is released primarily during deep, slow-wave sleep. Tissue repair accelerates. The immune system restores its reserves. Proteins are synthesized. Cellular damage is repaired. The body, in this view, uses sleep as a maintenance window, fixing the wear and tear of the day while the organism is not generating new damage. This theory has strong support. We know that growth hormone secretion peaks during sleep. We know that immune function is restored during rest. We know from the glymphatic system research that the brain clears toxic waste during sleep. But the restorative theory does not fully explain the diversity of sleep across species. Animals with very different metabolic demands, different body sizes, different lifespans, and different environmental pressures all sleep, but in wildly different amounts and patterns. If sleep were purely about restoration, you would expect a tighter correlation between metabolic rate and sleep duration. That correlation exists, but it is weak and inconsistent. The synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, proposed by Giulio Tononi and Chiara Cirelli, offers a different angle. During waking hours, the brain forms new synaptic connections as it learns and processes information. By the end of the day, the brain is saturated. Too many connections, too much neural noise. Sleep, in this view, is when the brain prunes back these connections, weakening the ones that are not important and strengthening the ones that are. This process, called synaptic downscaling, restores the brain's capacity to learn the next day. Without it, the neural circuitry becomes overloaded and inefficient. This is an elegant theory with strong experimental support in mammals and birds, but it struggles to explain sleep in organisms without complex brains. Jellyfish sleep, nematode worms sleep. These organisms do not have the kinds of synaptic networks that would require pruning. If sleep evolved originally for synaptic homeostasis, why do brainless creatures need it? Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. The glymphatic clearance theory, powered by the discoveries we discussed in Chapter 5, proposes that sleep is fundamentally about waste removal. The brain accumulates toxic metabolic byproducts during waking hours. Sleep activates the glymphatic system to flush those toxins out. Without sleep, the waste builds up and poisons the brain. This is the strongest mechanistic explanation to emerge in recent years, and it has powerful supporting evidence. But even this theory has complications. A 2024 study suggested that in certain conditions, waste clearance may actually be more active during wakefulness than during sleep. Though subsequent research in 2025 and 2026 has largely reaffirmed the primacy of sleep-dependent clearance, the debate is ongoing. And then, there is a theory that approaches the question from an entirely different direction. The ecological niche theory, formalized in a 2018 mathematical model, proposes that sleep evolved not because of any single internal function, but because of the structure of the environment itself. The Earth rotates. Day and night alternate. This creates two fundamentally different ecological niches, one defined by light and one defined by darkness. The optimal behavior for surviving in daylight is different from the optimal behavior for surviving in darkness. An animal that is well adapted to hunting in daylight may be poorly adapted to navigating in darkness. Rather than maintaining a single behavioral strategy around the clock, it is more efficient to have two distinct modes, one active and one dormant, each optimized for its respective conditions. The mathematical model proved something remarkable. In any temporally changing environment, where conditions cycle between two states, a strategy that includes a sleep-like dormant phase always achieves higher fitness than a strategy of continuous wakefulness, always. Regardless of the specific parameters, the math shows that in a periodic world, sleep is inevitable. This does not mean the ecological niche theory replaces the other explanations. It means that sleep may have originally evolved for ecological reasons and then been co-opted by biology for all the other functions we have described. Waste clearance, immune repair, memory consolidation, synaptic pruning, energy conservation. These may all be functions that were layered onto a behavior that originally existed simply because the world has a day and a night. The uncomfortable answer to the question of why we sleep may be that there is no single answer. Sleep is not one thing. It is many things. It is a waste clearance cycle, an immune restoration window, a memory consolidation engine, a synaptic pruning process, an energy management strategy, and an ecological adaptation, all layered on top of each other over hundreds of millions of years of evolution. These functions became so deeply embedded in biology, so tightly interwoven with every other physiological process, that removing any one of them would be catastrophic. Sleep is not a luxury that biology added to an already functioning system. It is a foundation that everything else was built on top of. Trying to remove it is like trying to remove the ground floor of a skyscraper without disturbing the floors above. The entire structure depends on it. And that brings us back to the present, back to the world of 2026, back to the species that has spent the last 150 years systematically attacking this foundation. Not because we do not need it, but because we have convinced ourselves that we can get away with less. The result is a global crisis that is quietly killing more people than most of the diseases that make the headlines. A crisis that affects a third of the adult population. A crisis that is measurably shortening lifespans, accelerating neurodegeneration, and raising cancer rates. A crisis that most people do not even know they are part of. That crisis is where we go next. Chapter 10. The Global Sleep Crisis. We are a species that has decided it does not need to sleep. Not consciously. No one sat down and made that decision. But the civilization we have built, the systems we run, the values we celebrate, the technologies we surround ourselves with, all of them conspire against the one biological process that everything else depends on. And the results are already here. They are in the hospital admission data. They are in the accident reports. They are in the cancer statistics. They are in the aging faces of people who are decades younger than they look. A 2025 study from the University of South Florida found that college students average 5.8 hours of sleep per night. That is below every medical recommendation from every health organization in the world. These are young people, people whose brains are still developing, people whose glymphatic systems should be running at peak efficiency, people whose telomeres should be long and healthy and intact, and they are sleeping less than 6 hours a night. They are not unusual. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that more than a third of American adults get less than the recommended 7 hours of sleep per night. More than 15% of the United States population works shifts, rotating between day and night schedules that shatter the circadian rhythm. The World Health Organization has classified night shift work as a probable human carcinogen. And this is not just an American problem. Industrialized nations worldwide report similar patterns. Artificial light, screens, shift work, long commutes, and the cultural glorification of busyness have collectively engineered a global sleep deficit that affects billions of people. The thing about a sleep deficit is that it does not announce itself. It does not feel like a crisis. It feels like normal life. You get up tired, you drink coffee, you push through the morning. You hit a wall after lunch, you drink more coffee. You get through the day, you go to bed later than you planned, because there is always one more thing to do, one more show to watch, One more message to answer. You sleep 5 or 6 hours. You get up tired. You do it again, and again, and again. For years, for decades. And the entire time, the damage is accumulating. Your natural killer cells are suppressed. Your cardiovascular risk is climbing. Your telomeres are shortening. Your glymphatic system is not getting enough time to clear the amyloid from your brain. Your epigenetic clocks are accelerating. You do not feel any of it. Your brain has adjusted its sense of normal so far downward that you have no reference point for what you are supposed to feel like. You think this is just how life is. It is not. This is what slow biological decline feels like from the inside. The death toll is not hypothetical. Sleep deprivation is linked to 5 of the top 15 causes of death in the United States. Cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, accidents, type 2, diabetes, hypertension. These are not rare diseases. They are the things that kill the most people. And insufficient sleep is a contributing factor in all of them. Drowsy driving alone causes an estimated 100,000 crashes, 71,000 injuries, and 1,550 deaths per year in the United States. That is more than 4 people every single day killed because someone was too tired to drive. And the number is almost certainly an undercount, because unlike alcohol impairment, there is no breathalyzer for sleepiness. There is no blood test. When a driver falls asleep at the wheel and crosses the center line, the accident report often lists the cause as driver error or loss of control. The word sleep rarely appears. The economic cost of sleep deprivation in the United States has been estimated at over $400 billion annually in lost productivity. That number accounts for absenteeism, reduced work output, workplace accidents, and healthcare costs attributable to insufficient sleep. It does not account for the immeasurable cost of diminished quality of life, impaired relationships, reduced creativity, and the slow erosion of cognitive potential that chronic sleep loss inflicts on an entire population. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical sleep industry is booming. Billions of dollars are spent every year on sleep medications. But here is the uncomfortable truth that the industry rarely advertises. Sleeping pills do not replicate natural sleep. They sedate. They reduce consciousness. They may help you fall asleep faster or stay asleep longer. But the sleep architecture, the carefully orchestrated sequence of light sleep, deep slow wave sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep that the brain needs for restoration, is often disrupted by the very drugs designed to promote it. As we discussed in Chapter 5, one of the most commonly prescribed sleep medications, zolpidem, actually reduces glymphatic clearance by 30%. You are unconscious, but your brain is not cleaning itself. You are asleep on paper, but you are not getting the sleep you need. And the most vulnerable population in this crisis is the one with the least ability to do anything about it: children. Screen exposure before bed suppresses melatonin production by up to 50%. The blue light emitted by phones, tablets, and computer screens hits receptors in the retina that signal the brain to stay awake. For adults, this is a manageable nuisance. For children and adolescents, whose brains are still developing, whose circadian systems are still calibrating, and whose sleep requirements are 8 to 10 hours per night, the effect is devastating. Adolescent sleep requirements conflict directly with school start times. Most high schools in the United States begin before 8 in the morning. Adolescent circadian biology, which shifts later during puberty, means that a typical teenager's brain is not ready to wake up until 8 or 9. Starting school at 7:30 forces teenagers to wake during their biological night, cutting short the final hours of sleep when, as the glymphatic research shows, the brain's waste clearance system is running at its highest efficiency. The consequences are measurable and alarming. Sleep deprivation in children is associated with shorter telomeres. It impairs memory consolidation. It reduces emotional resilience, the ability to regulate mood, and cope with stress. It increases the risk of obesity because sleep deprivation disrupts the hormones that regulate appetite, increasing ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and decreasing leptin, the satiety hormone. It increases the risk of depression and anxiety. A generation is growing up structurally sleep-deprived, not because they are lazy, not because they are making bad choices, because the systems they live in, the school schedules, the screen-saturated environment, the cultural pressure to be always connected, are incompatible with their biological needs, and the consequences may take decades to manifest. The telomere shortening, the amyloid accumulation, the epigenetic acceleration, all of it is happening now, in bodies that are 10 and 12 and 15 years old, building a foundation of biological damage that will express itself as disease in middle age and beyond. This is not a personal failing. It is a structural one. We have built a civilization that treats sleep as expendable, as something to be compressed, sacrificed, and optimized away. And the civilization is paying for it in disease, in accidents, in shortened lives, and in the slow, silent, measurable degradation of the most complex organ in the known universe. We know what sleep deprivation does to the body, the brain, the immune system, and the species. We know that animals evolved elaborate tricks to keep sleeping even when it could kill them. We know that the brain has a secret cleaning system that only runs at night. But there is one more thing that sleep does, something we have not yet discussed, something that every human experiences but no one fully understands. Sleep produces dreams, and dreams may be the closest thing we have to understanding consciousness itself. That is where we go next. Chapter 11. Sleep and the Dreaming Brain. Every night, your brain does something extraordinary. It builds a world, a complete, immersive, three-dimensional world populated with people, places, sounds, and emotions. You walk through this world as though it were real. You feel fear. You feel joy. You have conversations with people who do not exist. You visit places you have never been. You accept the impossible without question. You fly and think nothing of it. You speak to the dead and feel no surprise. And then you wake up and it dissolves. The world vanishes. The people disappear. The emotions fade. And within minutes, most of it is gone, slipping through your fingers like water. You were somewhere. You felt something, but you cannot quite hold on to what it was. Dreams are the most common altered state of consciousness that humans experience. Every person who sleeps long enough enters rapid eye movement sleep, the stage in which the most vivid and narrative dreams occur. And during rapid eye movement sleep, the brain is doing something that, from a neurological perspective, is almost indistinguishable from being awake. During rapid eye movement sleep, the brain is nearly as metabolically active as during full wakefulness. The visual cortex fires as though processing real visual input. The emotional centers, the amygdala and the limbic system, light up with intense activity. The motor cortex generates signals as though the body were moving. But two things are different. First, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for logic, critical thinking, and reality testing, goes largely offline. This is why dreams feel real while you are in them. The part of the brain that would normally say, "Wait, this does not make sense," is not running. You accept the dream's reality because the faculty that would reject it is asleep. Second, the body is paralyzed. During rapid eye movement sleep, the brainstem sends signals that suppress voluntary muscle activity, a state called muscle atonia. Your brain is generating commands to move, to run, to reach, to speak, but the signals are blocked before they reach your muscles. You are acting out an entire experience in your mind while your body lies perfectly still. This paralysis is a safety mechanism. Without it, you would physically enact your dreams, thrashing, running, swinging, potentially injuring yourself or anyone near you. In people with a condition called rapid eye movement, sleep behavior disorder, this paralysis fails, and they do exactly that. But dreams are not just a side effect of random neural firing. They serve functions that are only now being understood. Rapid eye movement sleep is where the brain processes emotional memories. Research has shown that experiences with strong emotional content are preferentially consolidated during rapid eye movement sleep. The brain replays the emotional event, but in a neurochemical environment where norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter associated with stress and anxiety, is at its lowest levels. This is significant. It means the brain is reprocessing the emotional charge of the experience while in a state of reduced stress response. The theory is that this allows the emotional intensity to be separated from the factual content of the memory. You remember what happened, but the visceral emotional sting is softened. Rapid eye movement sleep is, in a sense, overnight therapy. This has direct implications for post-traumatic stress. People with post-traumatic stress disorder often have disrupted rapid eye movement sleep. Their dreams are more distressing. The emotional processing that should happen overnight is impaired. The traumatic memory retains its full emotional charge night after night, and the cycle of re-experiencing, the hallmark of the disorder, continues. Fur seals provide an illuminating comparison. When fur seals are in the ocean, sleeping uni-hemispherically to keep swimming, they show almost no rapid eye movement sleep. But the moment they return to land and can sleep bilaterally, with both hemispheres offline simultaneously, they immediately enter extended periods of rapid eye movement sleep. Whatever rapid eye movement does, it requires the entire brain to go offline. One hemisphere at a time is not enough. The brain needs to be fully disengaged from the external world to do whatever it is that dreaming accomplishes. Beyond emotional processing, sleep is the brain's memory consolidation engine. During slow-wave sleep, the deepest stage of non-rapid eye movement sleep, the hippocampus replays the experiences of the day. Patterns of neural activity that occurred during waking hours are reactivated in compressed form. The hippocampus, which serves as a temporary storage buffer, transfers these patterns to the neocortex for long-term storage. Without this replay, the transfer fails. The memories are not consolidated. They decay. This is why pulling an all-nighter before an exam is counterproductive. You may spend more hours with the material, but without sleep, the material never makes the transition from fragile short-term encoding to durable long-term storage. The student who studies for 4 hours and sleeps for 8 will outperform the student who studies for 12 hours and sleeps for none. The sleeping brain is doing the work of learning. The waking brain merely collects the raw material. Research published in 2025 confirmed that glymphatic function is closely linked to memory networks. Specifically, the perivascular fluid dynamics of the glymphatic system interact with the rich club connections between the middle temporal gyrus and the parahippocampal gyrus, brain regions critical for memory. Poor sleepers showed disrupted relationships between glymphatic function and these memory networks, and this disruption directly mediated their memory decline. Sleep is not just important for memory because of neural replay. The physical cleaning of the brain's memory circuits is part of the process. Waste clearance and memory consolidation are intertwined. There is one more sleep deprivation case that belongs in this chapter. Not Randy Gardner, whose story we have already told, but a man named Peter Tripp. In 1959, 4 years before Gardner's experiment, New York radio disc jockey Peter Tripp staged a wake-a-thon in a glass booth in Times Square. He stayed awake for 200 hours, 8 days and 8 hours, broadcasting his radio show live while researchers and spectators watched. It was a publicity stunt for charity. The first 2 days were manageable. By day 3, Tripp was seeing things: spiders crawling on his shoes, cobwebs forming in the booth. By day 5, his paranoia became severe. He became convinced that the scientists observing him were trying to poison him. He accused them of conspiring against him. He lashed out at people who were trying to help him. By the final day, a neurologist was called in and found Tripp disoriented and deeply delusional. Unlike Gardner, who appeared to recover and return to normal life, Tripp did not fully recover. Colleagues and family members reported that his personality changed permanently after the wake-a-thon. He became morose, suspicious, difficult to be around. He went through multiple divorces. He lost his career. Whether the sleep deprivation directly caused these changes or merely revealed a pre-existing psychological fragility that had been held in check by normal sleep, no one can say for certain. But the contrast with Gardner's experience haunts the literature to this day. William Dement, the Stanford sleep researcher, witnessed both cases. He observed Tripp's collapse in 1959 and Gardner's apparent resilience in 1964. After watching Tripp, Dement initially concluded that prolonged sleeplessness leads to psychosis. After watching Gardner play pinball on day 10, he revised that view. The field of sleep science has never fully reconciled these two cases. Some people seem to survive extreme sleep deprivation with minimal lasting damage. Others are permanently altered, and we do not know why. What we do know is that sleep is where memories are forged, emotions are processed, and the brain rebuilds itself at the deepest level. Every night, the sleeping brain is doing work that is as complex and as essential as anything it does while awake. And the dreaming brain, the brain that builds worlds and then erases them, may be the closest thing we have to a window into what consciousness actually is. But there is one piece of evidence we have not yet presented, the most definitive, the most disturbing, and the most unambiguous proof that sleep is not optional. It does not come from a radio DJ in Times Square or a teenager in San Diego. It comes from a laboratory at the University of Chicago and a population of rats that were forced to stay awake until they died. That experiment is where we go next. Chapter 12: The Rat Experiment. In the early 1980s, a researcher at the University of Chicago named Alan Rechtschaffen set out to answer the question that sits at the foundation of everything we have discussed tonight. Can an animal die from lack of sleep alone? It sounds like a simple question, but answering it had eluded science for decades. The problem was methodology. Previous experiments on sleep deprivation in animals had used crude methods to keep subjects awake. Electrical shocks, cold water dunking, loud noises. These methods worked, but they introduced a fatal confound. Were the animals dying from sleep deprivation, or were they dying from the stress of being repeatedly shocked, dunked, and startled? You cannot separate the effects of sleep loss from the effects of the method used to prevent sleep if the method itself causes physiological harm. Rechtschaffen, working with his colleague Bernard Bergman, devised something more elegant, a device called the disc over water apparatus. The concept was deceptively simple. Two rats were placed on a round platform, a disc, suspended over a shallow pan of water. The platform could rotate slowly, like a lazy turntable. Both rats lived on this disc. Both were connected to electroencephalogram monitors that tracked their brain waves in real time. When the experimental rat's brain waves showed the onset of sleep, the disc began to rotate. The rat had to walk to stay on the platform. If it did not walk, it would be gently carried toward the edge, and its paws would dip into the water, waking it. The key innovation was the control rat. The control rat lived on the same disc and was subjected to the same rotations, the same disruptions, the same physical experience. But because the disc only rotated when the experimental rat fell asleep, the control rat was free to sleep whenever the experimental rat was awake. Both rats experienced the same physical environment, the same disc, the same water, the same interruptions. The only difference was that one rat could sleep and the other could not. This was the cleanest experimental design ever produced for studying sleep deprivation. Any effect that appeared in the experimental rats, but not in the controls, could be attributed to sleep loss rather than to the experimental apparatus. 10 rats were subjected to total sleep deprivation using this method. The results were unambiguous. All 10 experimental rats died, every single one. They died or were euthanized when death appeared imminent within 11 to 32 days. The control rats, living on the same disc, subjected to the same physical disruptions, remained healthy throughout the experiment. The syndrome that developed in the sleep-deprived rats followed a predictable and terrible progression. First came a debilitated appearance. Their fur became matted and unkempt. Lesions developed on their tails and paws, sores that would not heal. They looked sick. They looked old. Then came a paradox. The rats began eating more, significantly more. Their food intake increased dramatically, as though their bodies were desperate for energy. But despite eating more, they lost weight. Rapidly. Their bodies were burning through calories at an extraordinary rate. Measurements showed that their energy expenditure reached more than twice their baseline levels. They were consuming enormous amounts of food and still wasting away, as if their metabolism had been set to a level that no amount of eating could sustain. Then came the thermoregulatory collapse. The rats' body temperatures began to drop. They could no longer maintain their internal warmth. This is one of the most basic functions of a mammalian body, the ability to regulate temperature, and it was failing. The rats sought warmth. They huddled, but their bodies could not produce enough heat to compensate. As the experiment progressed, their temperatures fell further. The thermostat was broken. And then came the infections. The bacteria that killed the sleep-deprived rats were not exotic pathogens. They were ordinary organisms, the kind that live harmlessly on the skin and in the gut of every healthy rat. Opportunistic bacteria that the immune system normally holds in check without effort. But the immune systems of the sleep-deprived rats had collapsed so completely that these common bacteria invaded their bloodstreams and overwhelmed their bodies. The rats did not die from sleep deprivation in the way you might die from a bullet or a fall. They died because sleep deprivation destroyed their body's ability to maintain themselves. The immune system failed. The thermoregulatory system failed. The metabolic system spiraled out of control. The maintenance processes that keep a living organism alive, the processes that run quietly in the background every minute of every day, shut down one by one. And once they stopped, the body was defenseless. It was consumed by its own vulnerability. No single anatomical cause of death was identified. The autopsies found no specific organ failure, no tumor, no discrete pathology that could be pointed to as the killer. The cause of death was systemic. Everything failed. The organism simply could not sustain itself without sleep. The pattern is hauntingly familiar. Think back to Chapter 1, the stages of fatal familial insomnia, the autonomic dysfunction, the loss of temperature regulation, the metabolic chaos, the wasting, the eventual systemic collapse. The rats and the humans followed the same trajectory. A prion eating through the thalamus produces the same cascade as forced wakefulness on a rotating disc. The disease and the experiment converge on the same conclusion. Remove sleep and the body falls apart. Rechtschaffen conducted additional experiments on selective sleep deprivation. Rats deprived of only rapid eye movement sleep, while allowed to retain other sleep stages, survived longer but ultimately died as well. Within 16 to 54 days, the syndrome was similar. Weight loss despite increased eating, thermoregulatory failure, immune collapse, even partial sleep deprivation, the selective removal of specific sleep stages, was eventually lethal. These experiments are no longer conducted in the same form. The ethical standards of animal research have evolved, and the suffering involved in prolonged total sleep deprivation is now considered too severe to justify repetition. But the legacy of Rechtschaffen's work is unambiguous. Sleep deprivation, sustained long enough, is lethal, not because it targets a specific organ, not because it produces a specific disease, because it destroys the organism's capacity to do everything it needs to do to stay alive. Alan Rechtschaffen spent his career searching for the answer to why sleep exists. He never found it. No single mechanism emerged from his rat studies that explained the lethal effect of sleep loss. The closest he came was the observation that thermoregulatory failure appeared to be a common endpoint, suggesting that sleep might be essential for temperature regulation. But that hypothesis, while supported by the data, never fully accounted for the breadth of the syndrome. The immune failure, the metabolic chaos, the wasting, something more fundamental than temperature control was at stake. Rechtschaffen was fond of a statement that became one of the most quoted lines in sleep research. If sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it is the biggest mistake in the evolutionary process has ever made. His experiments proved the first part of that statement beyond any doubt. Sleep serves an absolutely vital function. The rats proved it with their lives. But what that function is, at its deepest level, remains the question. We have discussed the glymphatic system, the immune restoration, the memory consolidation, the synaptic homeostasis, the ecological niche theory. All of these are real. All of them are supported by evidence, but none of them, alone or together, fully explains why the absence of sleep is lethal. There is something about sleep that goes deeper than any single mechanism, something that touches the most fundamental level of what it means to be a living organism. And perhaps the deepest clue lies not in what sleep does, but in what sleep is, not a biological function, not a maintenance cycle, not a cleaning system, but a state of consciousness. Or more precisely, a state of unconsciousness, a nightly dissolution of the self that every human being experiences and that no one fully understands. What is sleep? Not what does it do, what is it? That question is where we go next. Chapter 13. What is sleep? Sleep seems like the most obvious thing in the world. You close your eyes, the world goes away. Some time passes, you open your eyes, the world comes back. You have been sleeping. Everyone knows what sleep is. But try to define it precisely, and the ground shifts under your feet. Sleep is not unconsciousness. Anesthesia produces unconsciousness, but anesthesia does not deliver the restorative benefits of sleep. A person under general anesthesia is unconscious, but not sleeping. Their brain is suppressed by chemicals into a state that superficially resembles sleep, but lacks the carefully orchestrated architecture of natural sleep. No cycling between slow wave and rapid eye movement stages, no glymphatic activation, no memory consolidation, no emotional processing. Anesthesia is unconsciousness without the content. Sleep is unconsciousness with a purpose. Sleep is not inactivity. The brain during sleep is extraordinarily active. During rapid eye movement sleep, as we discussed, neural activity rivals, waking levels. During slow-wave sleep, massive synchronized waves of electrical activity sweep across the cortex in patterns that do not occur during wakefulness. The sleeping brain is not resting. It is doing something different, something it cannot do while awake, with an intensity and coordination that rival anything it does during the day. Sleep is not a lower state of consciousness. Dreams can be more vivid, more emotionally intense, and more immersive than anything experienced during waking life. People report colors in dreams that are richer than what they see with their eyes open, emotions that are deeper than anything they feel during the day, experiences that feel more real than reality. If consciousness is measured by the vividness and intensity of subjective experience, then dreaming is not a diminished state. It may be an amplified one. Scientists currently define sleep by a cluster of behavioral and physiological features, a characteristic body posture, reduced responsiveness to external stimuli, distinctive electrical signatures in the brain, specifically the slow waves of non-rapid eye movement sleep and the desynchronized activity of rapid eye movement sleep. Rapid reversibility, meaning that unlike coma or death, sleep can be interrupted and the person immediately returns to wakefulness. And homeostatic rebound, meaning that if you are deprived of sleep, you need more of it, and the longer you are deprived, the more you need. But these criteria describe what sleep looks like, not what it is. They tell you how to recognize sleep. They do not tell you what sleep is doing, what it is for, or why the transition from wake to sleep involves a fundamental change in the state of consciousness itself. And that transition is perhaps the strangest thing about sleep. Think about what happens when you fall asleep. You lie down, you close your eyes, your thoughts begin to drift, and at some point, gradually and imperceptibly, you stop being you. Your continuous sense of self, your awareness of the room, your knowledge of who you are and what day it is and what you need to do tomorrow dissolves. The narrator goes silent. The screen goes dark. You cease to exist as a conscious entity. And then, hours later, you reassemble. The narrator returns. The screen lights up. You are you again, with a gap in the middle that you did not experience. The transition back is not gradual. You do not slowly become conscious. One moment you are not there, and the next moment you are. The lights come on, and you are back. But here is the question that should keep you up at night. If you will pardon the irony, who decided to turn you off? The transition from wakefulness to sleep is not under voluntary control. You cannot decide to fall asleep. You can create the conditions for sleep to arrive. You can lie down, close your eyes, relax your body, turn off the lights. But the actual moment of transition, the moment when consciousness dissolves, is not something you do. It is something that happens to you. Some process in your brain, operating below the level of conscious awareness, makes the decision that it is time for you to stop existing as a conscious entity. And then it pulls the switch. You have no say in the matter. You cannot override it indefinitely. As we have seen throughout this documentary, the brain will enforce sleep with or without your consent. Stay awake long enough, and microsleeps will impose themselves. Stay awake longer, and the brain will begin to fragment, parts of it falling asleep while you remain nominally awake. Stay awake even longer, and hallucinations, psychosis, and systemic collapse will follow. The brain will have its sleep. The only question is how much damage is done before it gets it. This tells us something profound about the nature of consciousness. We tend to think of wakefulness as the default state. We think of consciousness as the baseline, the normal, the given. And we think of sleep as the departure, the absence, the interruption. But the neuroscience suggests the opposite may be closer to the truth. Wakefulness is the active state. The brain expends enormous energy maintaining consciousness. It generates a coherent model of the world. It integrates sensory input. It maintains the narrative of self. It suppresses conflicting signals. It produces the illusion of a unified experience from billions of competing neural processes. Consciousness is work. It is expensive, and the brain cannot sustain it indefinitely. Sleep, in this view, is what happens when the brain stops doing that work. It is not that the brain actively produces sleep. It is that the brain actively produces wakefulness. And when it can no longer sustain that effort, wakefulness collapses, and what remains is sleep. Unconsciousness is not the departure from the norm. Consciousness is the departure. Unconsciousness is the baseline. We are, at our most fundamental level, unconscious beings who maintain brief, expensive, unsustainable periods of awareness. The study of sleep disorders reveals just how fluid and fragile the boundary between these states truly is. People with fatal familial insomnia, the disease that opened this documentary, enter a state in their final weeks that defies easy categorization. Their eyes are open, they appear awake, but they are acting out dream-like scenarios, reaching for invisible objects, mouthing words to people who are not there. They are not awake, they are not asleep, they are somewhere in between, trapped in a liminal state where the boundaries of consciousness have dissolved. Sleepwalkers perform complex behaviors while unconscious. They walk through houses. They open doors. They navigate staircases. They have been known to drive cars, cook meals, and hold conversations, all without any conscious awareness. The motor and navigational systems of the brain are fully functional. The conscious self is absent. The body operates on autopilot while no one is home. Lucid dreamers represent the opposite phenomenon. They are conscious inside a hallucinatory world. They know they are dreaming while the dream continues. They can sometimes control the dream's content. They are simultaneously awake and asleep, conscious within an unconscious state. The boundary between wake and sleep, which we experience as a hard line, a switch that is either on or off, is, in reality, far more permeable than we assume. Narcolepsy, a neurological condition caused by the destruction of orexin-producing neurons in the hypothalamus, causes sudden, involuntary intrusions of sleep into waking life. A person with narcolepsy can be in the middle of a conversation and abruptly enter rapid eye movement sleep, complete with muscle paralysis and dreaming. The switch that separates wake from sleep is, in these individuals, faulty. The states bleed into each other. What all of these conditions tell us is that sleep is not the opposite of consciousness, it is the other side of it. Wake and sleep are not binary states. They are two modes of a single system, a system that can be in one mode or the other, or sometimes, disturbingly, in both at once. The boundaries are negotiable. The transitions are not always clean. And the assumption that you are either fully conscious or fully unconscious is a simplification that the brain does not always respect. Sleep may be the closest window we have into understanding what consciousness actually is, because every night, the brain demonstrates that consciousness is something it generates, maintains, and then deliberately dissolves. It proves that the self is not a permanent fixture. It is a process that can be started and stopped, a process that requires energy and maintenance to sustain, a process that, when the resources run low, the brain will shut down, regardless of whether you have given it permission. We started this documentary with a disease that steals sleep. We have spent 13 chapters exploring what sleep does, what happens when it is taken away, and why every living creature on Earth needs it. Now, in our final chapter, we return to where we began, to the family, to the question, and to the thing that all of this means for you, tonight, when you close your eyes. That is where we go now. Chapter 14, The Price of Wakefulness. Somewhere in northern Italy tonight, someone is taking a small white pill, 100 milligrams of doxycycline, an antibiotic. They have taken it every day for years. They will take it every day for years more. 10 years total. That is the protocol. This person carries a mutation at codon 178 of the PRNP gene. They know what this mutation does. They have watched it work. They have sat at bedsides and watched the people they love lose the ability to sleep, watched them deteriorate through the 4 stages, watched them vanish into a waking nightmare that ended only in death. They carry the same mutation in every cell of their body. They have a 50% chance of developing the same disease, and there is only one trial in the world attempting to prevent it. Every night, this person lies down and closes their eyes, and every night, they fall asleep, and every morning, they wake up, and they are grateful. Not in the abstract way that healthy people are grateful for things they have never lost, in the specific, personal, devastating way that only someone who has watched sleep be taken from another human being can understand. For them, sleep is not something to be optimized. It is not something to be compressed into 3 efficient hours by a DARPA program. It is not something to be sacrificed for a deadline or a late-night television show or 1 more hour of scrolling through a phone screen. Sleep is the most precious thing they have, and they are watching, with the quiet terror of someone who knows the odds, to see if they will get to keep it. We have traveled a long way tonight. We began with a family that has carried a death sentence in their blood for over 200 years. A single misfolded protein that eats the thalamus and strips sleep away one stage at a time until there is nothing left. We watched a 17-year-old boy stay awake for 11 days and spend the rest of his life wondering if the price would come due. We followed the brain through its first 24 hours without rest, through the microsleeps and the fog, through the hallucinations at 48 hours, through the psychosis at 72. We watched the body break down, the immune system failing, the heart straining, the telomeres shortening, the cells aging faster than the calendar says they should. We discovered a hidden plumbing system in the brain that flushes out the very proteins that cause Alzheimer's disease. A system that only runs while we are unconscious, that accelerates the longer we sleep, that stops completely when we do not. We descended into dark rooms where governments turned sleeplessness into a weapon. We followed the military's pursuit of the sleepless soldier, from amphetamines to modafinil to precision neuromodulation programs that aim to compress a full night of restoration into 3 hours. We marveled at dolphins that sleep one hemisphere at a time and frigate birds that sleep in seconds while soaring over the Pacific. We asked why every living thing on Earth sleeps and found that after a century of research, science still does not have a complete answer. We watched a generation grow up, sleep-deprived, their telomeres shortening, their brains accumulating waste that will not be cleaned. We learned that dreams are not noise but signal, that the dreaming brain is processing emotions and consolidating memories and doing work that cannot be done any other way. We watched rats die on a spinning disc, not from any single organ failure but from the slow, total collapse of every system that keeps a body alive. And we asked what sleep is, not what it does, but what it is, and found that the answer touches the deepest question in all of philosophy. What does it mean to be conscious? Now we are here, at the end, and the question is, what do we do with all of this? The first thing we do is acknowledge something that our culture does not want to hear. Sleep is not a weakness, it is not laziness, it is not wasted time. It is the most essential biological process you perform. More essential than exercise, more essential than any diet, more essential than any supplement or medication or wellness practice. Every piece of evidence in this documentary points to the same conclusion. Sleep is when the brain takes out its trash. Sleep is when the immune system rearms. Sleep is when memories are forged and emotions are processed and the cellular machinery of life is maintained. To never sleep again is to die, not metaphorically, literally. The rats proved it. Fatal familial insomnia proves it. The science proves it. The second thing we do is take the warning seriously. We are living through a global experiment in sleep deprivation. Artificial light, screens, shift work, the 24-hour economy, the cultural worship of productivity, all of it is systematically eroding the one process that keeps us healthy, sane, and alive. The consequences are not future predictions. They are present realities. The cardiovascular disease, the cancer rates, the Alzheimer epidemic, the accident statistics, the shortened telomeres in children who sleep with phones beside their pillows. This is happening now. And the third thing we do is sit with the mystery. Because after everything we have learned tonight, the deepest truth is that we do not fully understand what sleep is. We know what it does. We know what happens when it is taken away. We know the price, but we do not know the purpose, not completely. The deepest mystery is not in space. It is not in the ocean. It is not in quantum physics. It is in the thing your body does every single night without your permission, for reasons it will not fully explain. Every night, something in your brain decides that it is time for you to stop being you. It dissolves your consciousness. It paralyzes your body. It floods your mind with visions that feel more real than the room you fell asleep in. It runs a cleaning cycle through your neural tissue. It replays the day's memories and decides which to keep and which to discard. It repairs damage. It restores defenses. It does all of this in the dark, without your knowledge or consent. And then, hours later, it reassembles you. It gives you back your name, your memories, your sense of who and where you are, and you wake up as though nothing happened. This happens every night, to every human being on Earth, to every mammal, to every bird, every reptile, every fish, every insect, every worm. To creatures with brains and creatures without them, it has been happening for hundreds of millions of years, and we still do not fully understand why. Humans have spent the last 150 years declaring war on this process. We have flooded our nights with artificial light. We have filled our bedrooms with screens. We have built economies that run around the clock. We have told ourselves that sleep is for the weak, that success requires sacrifice, that the early bird gets the worm, that we can sleep when we are dead. The science says otherwise. The science says sleep is when you are most alive, in the ways that matter most. The science says the price of wakefulness is paid in blood and neurons and years. The science says every hour you steal from sleep is borrowed against a debt that biology will eventually collect. The Italian family knows this. They know it in the way that only people who have watched sleep disappear can know it. For them, the act of falling asleep is not mundane. It is not taken for granted. It is a gift, a nightly reprieve from a fate that may be encoded in their genes. Every morning they wake up is a morning they were not certain they would have. And perhaps that is the final lesson of this documentary. Not the neuroscience, not the statistics, not the military programs or the animal adaptations or the evolutionary theories. The lesson is simpler than any of that. Sleep is precious. It is precious because it keeps you alive. It is precious because it keeps your mind intact. It is precious because it clears the poison from your brain and restores the soldiers in your blood and writes the day's memories into the permanent record. And it is precious because it is not guaranteed. There are people on this earth tonight who would give anything for what you are about to do. So tonight, when the documentary ends and the room grows quiet and the weight of the day begins to settle into your bones, do something radical. Do something that our entire culture is designed to prevent you from doing. Close your eyes, let go, and sleep. Not because you have nothing better to do, because there is nothing better to do. Because the most important thing your body will do tonight is the thing it does without your permission. Because the darkness is not empty, it is full of work, full of cleaning and building and repairing and remembering, full of the quiet, essential, irreplaceable labor that keeps you whole. And the most terrifying what if in this entire documentary is not a disease or a weapon or a spinning disc. It is this. What if you closed your eyes tonight and never fell asleep again? You would not survive it. Nothing does. Sleep well. If you enjoyed this deep journey into the science of sleep, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these investigations possible. Tell us in the comments, what surprised you most tonight? Did you know about the glymphatic system before this documentary? Do you think you are getting enough sleep? And what topic should we explore next? We love hearing your thoughts, and the conversation in the comments is always the best part. Thank you for spending this time with us. We will see you in the next one. Good night.